Maude, starring Beatrice Arthur, and Kojak, starring Telly Savalas, will return next Saturday night at their regular times on most of these stations.
It was not the best of times in Cleveland. Maybe the only thing that was really happening was the music scene.
Now the reason we're here.
Well, the Agora was a knockdown, drag-out rock and roll club.
Low stage, you know, the ceiling is just about this far above you. It's underground.
There's that energy you get from that kind of berserk mob feel.
There was no mode. It was just like people were on stage, just immediately stage diving. I'll be the soundtrack to your chaos. I hope no one got hurt. Did anyone get hurt?
Ladies and gentlemen, the main event. Round for round, pound for pound, there ain't no finer band around. Bruce Springsteen and the 8th Street Band. Cleveland, how you doing? Don't touch your dial, this is not a test!
There's a brief snippet of a forthcoming documentary about a legendary venue, probably the most legendary one in Ohio, the Agora. And with me tonight is a gentleman who has sort of assumed the mantle of Agora history and is creating that documentary. Please say hello to Jay Bolin. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, you, before we get into the doc, this is your old stomping grounds.
Yes, it is.
You're from here, so how does it feel to be back?
It feels weird. I mean, I was back here a couple years ago. My sister got inducted to the Sports Hall of Fame thing, so I was back here for that. But yeah, it feels weird. Feels good though. The Hudson's awesome. So.
Well, we're glad to have you, and the shirt I think says it all about what's going on these days. That's amazing.
Yes, this is from the actually Atlanta Agora,
right?
And they opened it, but a lot of people don't realize that there was many Agoras.
There was many. I mean, just on there we see Youngstown, Painesville, Columbus. I think there was Toledo.
There was Toledo, Tampa Bay, Dallas, right. Houston,
Akron.
Yeah. There's one in Connecticut.
Right.
And then there was Buckeye Lake, which was a 55,000 seat outdoor venue.
Sure.
So, but I mean, it all started right here in Cleveland in February 27th, 1966.
Right.
Hank LeConte opened up the first Agora, which wasn't a music place. It was more for like students.
It was like a coffee house almost, right?
Yeah, it was. So it was, and it was right on the corner of Random Roads and right in Little Italy, where it was. Mm-hmm. And he had saw an opportunity because at the time, a lot of bars were having problems with kids who were in college coming to bars and then kind of getting in fights with kids who weren't in college, type of thing. So he opened up the first Agora for college students. So you had to have a college ID to get in.
Sure, yeah.
And you basically paid, it was almost like you had a membership. Mm-hmm. And so everyone who was a member there was given a mug that they kept up on the wall. And I think, and then he actually, I have some at home, but he created Agora currency. Oh, so wow. Like you had to, and you used that to purchase drinks and stuff. But I think that was his way back in the 60s to get away having a liquor license. I'm not for certain on that, but and then it was just such a small place that that year they did their first national act with the band called the Buckinghams, but it was so crowded and the neighbors were kind of like,
they weren't happy.
So it moved down in '67 closer to Cleveland State on East 24th Street, which for a lot of people that's where the heyday was.
Yeah, that's so many shows that have since been, or even at the time, released on vinyl for wide release. They had the TV show that was done from there. And a lot of your documentary, I imagine, focuses on that era that was sort of magic for the Agora, and when there really wasn't a lot else going on in Cleveland.
Yeah,
right?
there really wasn't. And God, we interviewed a guy by the name of John Grabowski from the Western Reserve Historical Society. He's got, I can't put this twist on it that he does, but the importance that the Agora played back just in Cleveland in general for like these kids that age. But during that era, yeah, we focus on that a lot. But kind of like our tagline is the rise, fall, and legacy of a rock and roll cathedral. And now potentially rebirth of a rock and roll cathedral. But,
yeah, let's hope.
But yeah, back then, I mean, it was, you mentioned like the vinyl and like the TV show, because a lot of people ask me all the time, like, well, what made the Agora like different from like the film or all these other great places? And the thing that made it different was it was the owner. Yeah. And there was a personal side of it, but then also an innovation side of it. The Agora was really a first for a lot of things. So in 1970, it was the Hank through Agora was the first to ever do a live broadcast of rock and roll on FM, which they did with Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes, which was actually the performance was down in Columbus, but they aired it here. And so that year they actually started. They teamed up with WNCR here in Cleveland, which was owned by Nationwide Insurance at the time. And they had a bunch of stations, and they started doing these live broadcasts. And it was, I mean, it was great because, I'll even take a step back. The reason why they were able to do this was because in 1968, the Agora, Hank built actually a professional recording studio attached, first of its kind. And so it was able to actually, there was a feed in the stage that, one went to the board, the sound that everyone heard, and then the other one went to the studio.
Right, and they had to sound a little different for technical reasons.
Yeah, so totally, absolutely. And so they did some broadcast and then in '73, Nationwide said rock and roll's not our thing. We're done. So they changed formats, and that was actually that's when WMMS came in. They were still a young fledgling station, and
they really put each other on the map, the Agora and MMS.
Yeah, I mean, really, I like to. Without the, I mean, Hank would never take credit for anything, but like without the Agora, there was no WMMS. But then when WMMS came around, it made the Agora, a premier, helped make the Agora a premier spot. But yeah, they went on, and then they went to like tape. They used to tape it, and the Agora eventually turned that into. Translating that to TV. They were the first one ever to do TV, and they did that in '73. But it was in '78 when they started it was called On Stage at the Agora, and their TV show and radio shows, like the rock and roll versions, were broadcast here locally, but then they were also picked up like the King Biscuit Flour Hour, and they were distributed in almost 46, 47 different states.
Yeah, pretty good.
And then they had a jazz show that was actually, it was a radio show that was aired in over 50 stations, and it was here in the States, Europe, South America. So
it's big on the outside of the U.S., even though people don't. Was it Monday nights were jazz nights, or what was it?
Tuesday nights. I believe Tuesday nights were jazz nights.
Yeah.
So really that made it actually helped make it a platform for artists, and also at the time, the record labels considered Cleveland to be, a testing ground for new music. So
if it worked here, it would probably work for the rest of the country.
Absolutely. They said that Cleveland had an intelligent palate for new music, and if you could break in Cleveland, you could break anywhere.
Sure.
And the Agora was a big part of helping break those acts. I was, one of the acts that we're trying to get is Rush, and they've expressed interest in, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson have. Neil Peart has declined. He's not really a social guy, which I understand.
Which is fine.
But the woman who's kind of like their gatekeeper manager, she's managed their record label for years. I talked to her on the phone, and she said that if it wasn't for the Agora and WMMS, there might not be a Rush.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the back of the first album, they thanked WMMS, real big prominent letters. So.
Yeah, they were the first ones actually to play them.
Sure.
And so. And we have lots of stories like that. I was talking to a guy by the name of Shep Gordon.
Okay, they just did a documentary on him.
Yeah,
Superman,
which is awesome.
Which is a great documentary.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I saw that, and I was like, I want. He had a philosophy very much similar to Hank's.
Seems like, yeah.
But he was like, you had to play the Agoras to launch a career, and he specifically mentioned Alice Cooper and
there's a lot of folks. David Bowie.
Hank. That show. David Bowie played a show with Iggy Pop at the
Pop.
Agora. And what always impressed Hank about that show was that, because Bowie was big at that time.
He was huge, yeah. This is the late 70s by this point, right?
And he was playing like keys, I think, and he said he kept his back to the crowd. And he said that Hank, that always impressed him because the reason why he did that, he didn't want to steal any thunder away from
Which is great.
Iggy Pop,
Yeah.
who was up and coming. But
Apparently Bowie stayed up then all night mixing the show.
Oh, okay.
And then I heard that they all drove, I think Columbus was the next stop. So they all piled into their cars and they were going down 71 or 77, mooning each other at 6 in the morning after finishing this. So.
See, now that's great. See, and I'm passionate about music, history, and the Agora.
Yeah.
And, I think that, I like to think that, that I know a lot about it, but I still, learn stuff every day and stories like that.
Yeah.
And some of them are like, they're almost, is that true or not?
Yeah, I got to get some verification on this.
Yeah, right. Like there's this good story about Springsteen when he played. One of the most famous show at the Agora was the '78 show.
Yeah, of course.
And he was scheduled to play the Coliseum later that month, and so he came back later that month. And that same night, Southside Johnny was playing the Agora.
Right.
And Hank was telling me, I got a phone call from Southside, who was at the Coliseum. Was like, I'm about to go on stage with Springsteen. Can we delay the show?
Sure.
Another problem was that Stephen Van Zandt was also the guitarist of Southside Johnny,
that's right,
so they had to
at the
delay
time,
the show
yeah.
for like 3 hours. Anyway, Southside Johnny fills in with Springsteen at the Coliseum, and then he goes down and starts his show at the Agora. But for the encore, after the E Street Band and Springsteen finished, Gary Talent, Clarence Clemens, and Stephen Van Zandt got in a van and they went down to the Agora and they actually they joined Southside for the encore.
Yeah, nice.
And then Springsteen had to do an interview for some New York station after the show, and then he got in a van,
he
drove
went
down,
over, yeah.
and he joined him for the encore. And that show we have on video.
Nice.
But the story was that Springsteen was banging on the door to get in, and who knows if that's
probably
true.
couldn't hear him, yeah.
Yeah. So so I never really when I'm talking to artists, I don't know exactly what they remember and stuff.
Right.
And there's another story where just recently where the Agora there was a recording studio next to it, and one of the guys who works at the studio was like, it's probably going back to 2011 or so. He's like, I was outside smoking and I saw this guy the guy looked really familiar. He had a hat on. He said hi, and it's like a few minutes. He went in, and a few minutes later he came out with Hank, and he kind of was like, really? I don't think so. And the next day he's like, Hank, who was that guy you went to lunch with? Because Hank was like, oh, we're going to lunch. And he's like, oh, that was Bruce.
Oh, man.
So, so we're hoping to get an interview with Springsteen. I mean, right now we've got an amazing cast for the film as it is.
Exactly. Well, let's take a look at a little bit of the film. And we'll give people an idea of what they can expect coming, I think, later this year.
Yeah, it's later this year, or hopefully. I mean, we've got a lot of it finished.
Yeah.
We're in the process of actually raising funds to finish the film.
Sure.
Which, if you talk to any filmmaker, that's the hardest thing.
That's the biggest
especially for a
part of it.
documentary.
Yeah.
But we've got a great cast, and we're hoping that that'll go smoothly. But yeah, so we're hoping we'll have a rough cut to final cut finished by the end of this year.
All right, good stuff. Let's take a look at a few minutes of it, and we'll be right back.
Hank became your champion. You always got kind of a different feeling when you came to Cleveland. It was sort of being a part of the family. You belonged for a little while.
He was a hustler, and I was a hustler too, in that I was determined to get on stage and kick ass for 2 hours.
Just an amazing amount of people went through there and paid their dues there before they hit the arenas and before they hit the stadiums.
So there's some brief snippets from the forthcoming documentary about I keep saying Agora, but my mouth wants to say legendary Agora, because the words are joined, as they probably are for you. And Richard Patrick, being with 9 Inch Nails, Filter and everything, a lot of his time at the Agora, mid to late 80s, was probably after the original Agora. What was it, 1984? There was a big fire, it got destroyed.
So so the story is that it actually got destroyed. What happened was there was a fire, and it actually could have been repaired, from what Hank told me. But at the time, Cleveland State was kind of they eminent domain type of thing, and which is eventually why Peabody's went away, but years later. But and so he had to move it, and so it could have been replaced. So he, at the time, he had offers to move it closer to downtown, but kind of like he went against the grain. He moved it to the old Metropolitan Opera House,
which is weird,
which was at the time it's still in Midtown,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
But in Midtown, if you look at all the developments going on in Cleveland right now, you have the big thing is a connectivity,
right?
And you have downtown, you have uptown now, but Midtown's been kind of the area that's like
a little empty,
right? And so imagine, when I went to the Agora in the '90s, it was bad then.
Oh yeah, that's when I used to go. Yeah.
And it was, that place was, but in that, where he had moved it now, where it's in now, that was the old WHK studios,
right?
Which
so
later became WMMS.
Yeah.
And actually, when it was WHK, that's actually where Alan Freed
said rock and roll.
He coined the phrase right there in that facility. So, so he moved over there, and Richard, when we interviewed him, he talks about like how his older brother Robert, guy from the Terminator, and great actor himself, or
filmmaker, well
successful, known. Right? Yeah. And he tells a story about his brother came home. I think it was the Clash that he saw.
Oh wow!
And so he comes home and talks about and. So then Richard went on to he was one of the first guitarists in Nine Inch Nails. I think the tour, the live version, when they went on the road, and then he started Filter, which and Filter's still around today, making. He's writing, I think, some of his best music yet. But he talks about when he did a big show there. I think it was for the 30th anniversary of the Agora or something, and it was sold out in the theater. Wow. And he talks about how he knew he had arrived when he walked on that stage.
Wow! Yeah,
and because he'd grown up going, the legendary acts that he went and saw, and so many bands came through there. You know?
Absolutely.
And so I think by the time he was old enough, it was probably,
the later one,
right?
And then by that point, it seems like they were winding down the out of town.
So
the Akron became the Boot Scoot. I remember.
Yeah, that was he opened 13 Agoras in the early 80s, expanded really fast.
Yeah.
But then due to some the economic downturn in the country, and then he also got really sick, so he had to close it down. So he basically cut the Cleveland one. And I grew up going there in the '90s. I had no idea the rich history of the legacy of the Agora until I met him later in life, and so but it was he actually stepped away. He always had these great stories too. Like, if I can talk about Hank for just a second.
Absolutely.
Hank earlier I was saying there was two things that made the Agora special, but Hank was really
he was the engine, the catalyst for all
right.
of
He was
this.
like the man behind the curtain. Never took credit for things, but he was. I think Todd Rundgren said it best. He said, maybe not for everyone, but for a lot of artists, Hank became your champion, and he made sure people knew about you. When you came through Cleveland, you felt like you were part of the family.
That's the phrase that keeps coming through in all the clips.
He would have artists come out to his house. There's a famous story for his 50th birthday party, how they went down, it was like Todd Rundgren, some of the guys from the Cars, Eddie Money, came down to his house, and those guys were huge at the time.
Of course, yeah.
In Independence, and they went out and played a softball game with kids.
Right.
And the kids were like, who are they? Like, they knew these guys. They're like, what do you mean we're going to play softball with Eddie Money? So, but he gave a lot of people behind this, he gave it an opportunity.
Of
and
course, yeah.
He gave me an opportunity when he didn't have to. I know nothing about making a movie prior to this. He was just so kind and just non-threatening.
Absolutely.
And he changed my life in ways that, and so when I he was in great shape when I started working on this project with him, and it did not. He was still working 14 hours a day, and it did not occur to me that he wouldn't be around to see the end of it.
Yeah.
And but when he got sick, he went real quickly.
It was very sudden. Yeah.
And I was lucky to spend a lot of time in his house when he was sick, and I get choked up when I think about it. Like he was just, like me and many others, he gave an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why it's been a hard process to get this film up and running and going. We've got some momentum, but that's one of the reasons why I can't stop until we're finished, is because of him. So
of course, I remember the last time that I was there and I was talking to him, maybe 2012. He said, hey, let me show you something. He took me out front onto Euclid and he motioned to the things. He said, now this used to be white motors and this, and he had all these plans for the things. And I was like, this is awesome. And then not too long after that, it was pretty sudden. And
we did some renderings. He had a vision of you know, he wanted to, at the time, team up with AEG, which is now happening.
Yeah.
But he wanted to move the ballroom because there's two venues in there. The theater, which is like about 1,700, 2,000 you can get in there. And then the ballroom, they're in the same location, about 650, 700. But he saw that whole area of Midtown like as becoming like a music district.
Yeah. That's right.
And I mean, he had that vision back in the early 90s. Wow. And so we actually did a rendering. Maybe you can show it. I can send it to you.
Yeah,
But like,
I think I've seen that actually.
Yeah, it's really cool, like what it would look like. But I mean, he was still, you know, I mean, the legacy of the Agora was so important to him.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important. It became so important to me was because he did give me a chance, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far. I've made a lot of mistakes, but in this process, but it's. You know, I think he would be proud with where we're at right now, and we're almost done. Like the finish line is there. So
you've got an amazing cast so far: Todd Rundgren, Eddie Money, Ian Hunter, Richard Patrick. Who am I?
Ted Nugent.
Ted Nugent's in there.
Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo.
Nice.
Neil Spider Giraldo. Frank Amato from Boku. Let's see, who am I forgetting? He said Ian Hunter.
Yeah.
Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Eric Singer from Kiss. Eddie Money, John Oates from Hall & Oates, and I'm sure I'm leaving out somebody.
And then there's so many photos showing all these group of Van Halen, Metallica coming through before they were able to play the 40,000, 20,000 seat arenas.
Oh, yeah.
Like everybody somehow played it. What do you think it was about the place? Because I remember reading the famous 1978 Springsteen show that the walls were sweating. There was a low ceiling. What do you think it was?
I think partly it was, again, Hank and his, like, to find, like, new talent.
Yeah.
But also it was the people in Cleveland who came out. I mean, back then there wasn't a lot to do downtown. So, like, Monday nights, you just went out to the Agora. Sunday nights were known as, like, they used to call them, like, something like Golden Sundays because, I mean, the Raspberries were the house band there for,
that's right.
for at least a year. Two of my favorite interviews so far have been with Jim Bonfanti and Eric Carmen.
Yeah.
Because they were just so emotional to, like, Hank used to let them have the keys and practice at the Agora for the Raspberries.
That's amazing.
And they just talked about how much they loved him. And you know, I'm usually the one who gets emotional on set, like if I talk about Hank. But like Jim got really, I mean, it was just so touching.
Yeah.
And so that's what, you know. So it was, you know, it was a bunch of factors that kind of came. You know, I don't know if you could. I don't think you could recreate it today. But it's nice to see that the legacy, you know, AEG's made a huge investment to come in and to you know, redo, because the Agora needed some work.
Sure. It's 100 years old.
Yeah, and now and that's really, I mean, when you talk about, like, you know, what kind of caused the fall real quickly, and we're almost out of time, but not the fall, I wouldn't say fall, but, like, you know, Hank was the first one to open multiple locations, which gave him buying power and all this sort of stuff. And that was that business model, which you later saw, like all the House of Blues.
House of Blues, yeah.
Right, and so the industry consolidated, and, you know, for the longest time, Live Nation would bring their shows to the Agora, but then when they bought House of Blues,
this is exactly what he was telling me. Yeah,
it was cut
out the local guy,
and so I think that this is one of the only markets where I love Live Nation, but where they operated without a competitor, and so with AEG coming in, I think, you know, a lot of acts were skipping this market recently. I think we're going to see more. You know, I think we'll see
a bunch of good shows coming up. Yeah.
So a bunch of good shows coming to the Agora. Modest Mouse, the Decemberists, the War on Drugs. So some you know,
and maybe some surprises.
Maybe some surprises.
We'll
yes.
Well, on that note, you got to tell us roughly you said you can see the finish line. So you're still trying to raise funds, and you may have an idea of a few other things you need to do before you've actually got something.
So we're starting. We got enough footage to start a rough cut right now.
Okay.
But there's still some interviews, some artist interviews we're trying to line up, and then we got to get some people who are behind the scenes, because there's a lot of people who went on to have amazing careers.
Yeah.
In the entertainment industry who started behind the scenes.
Sure,
so,
of course.
But we're, you know, if anyone's looking to learn how they can participate, you know, I think they're going to put my contact name and number up there, and we're always looking for some help. And the Agora helped launch. Like, we're always looking for people who are fresh too. You know, like, because that was, you know, the Agora gave a lot of, you know, bands of starts for people behind the scenes. So anyway, so we're finish line is closed. We need some funds to finish the post production, and licensing's big. So
of course, it's going to be a lot of that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all this great info. And we're going to look forward to it, and we'll have you back when it's finished.